Today on Ag News Daily.
It is more important now than ever that we are telling our story about what tools we use, how we use them safely, and why they are so incredibly important, not just to the successful operation of America's farms, but what that means then for consumers and the supply chain.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. It's been a while for me, Delaney.
It feels good to be back in the studio.
It kind of does. I should still be in the field, but I've caught the field cultivator, so here I am.
Well, I think some folks are going to be wrapping up. We're going to be hopefully wrapping up this weekend. So
I know we've had some good weather here in Iowa, but a mix of extreme spring weather is impacting crop conditions across other parts of the Midwest as we head into mid-May. After an early season stretch of record warmth that pushed crop development ahead by nearly 3 weeks in some areas, a sharp frost and freeze event happened here in May to bring renewed concerns for crop stress, particularly where plants had already emerged. At the same time, cold and wet conditions continue to delay planting in parts of the upper Midwest, slowing fieldwork progress while some areas are still dealing with excess moisture. Others are seeing drier signals that are beginning to emerge as part of the northern plains, offering some cautious optimism for planting windows. Looking ahead, though, below normal temperatures are expected to persist into early next week, with the additional frost risks in some areas before a warm-up comes later. While now we see the southern U.S. remain wetter, and dryness and wind in parts of the plains are contributing to those ongoing wildfire risks. The USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says that it would take multiple rain events to fully ease that threat in Nebraska, where dry grasses and brush continue to fuel fire danger amid an active wildfire season across the region. Even here in the Midwest, especially in Iowa, some people are still planting around ponds, Delaney, and others
certainly
are getting dust devils.
But let's take a look at the latest USDA crop progress report that showed this week corn planting is at about 38% complete, matching last year's pace and ahead of the 5-year average of 34%, with now 13% of the crop emerged. Soybean planting is also running ahead of the average at 33% complete compared to the 28% 5-year average, and last year's average of 23%, with 13% of those beans emerged. Before we get to this week's news, let's hear this week's tips with Corteva Agriscience.
Hey, this is Andrew Luzum, nitrogen stabilizer specialist with Corteva Agriscience. Quick tip today, so when we're using nitrogen during citrus applications, make sure you're considering the use of N-Serve and Instinct. We consistently see a nice 5-bushel return during that time period, so it makes sense to use these products even out through citrus.
We appreciate that tip, but now it's time to see what came out of the CME Barometer. Latest farmer sentiment has declined in April, according to that Purdue University and CME Group Ag Economy Barometer. Those results were released earlier this week. Concerns about input costs and availability continue to weigh heavily on producers. The index dropped from 127 in March to 121 in April. The survey found that 46% of farmers still view high input costs as their biggest concern, while worries about input availability jumped from 11 to 14%. The report also showed fewer farmers are optimistic about the future of the ag economy, farmland values, and the overall financial condition for agriculture. The survey also found that corn growers expect break-even prices to rise this year, while the willingness to make large farm investments fell to its lowest level, Delaney, since October of 2024.
Well, we also saw the Rural Mainstreet Index dropped sharply in March to 40.9, well below the growth-neutral mark of 50, signaling continued economic stress across agriculture-dependent communities, as was released also earlier this week. Creighton University economist Ernie Goss says weak commodity prices and high input costs continue to pressure both farmers and rural businesses across the Midwest. Despite tighter margins, the report also showed some signs of stability, so some positive news there. Farmland values improved slightly while loan demand increased as producers leaned more heavily on credit to manage cash flow. Farm equipment sales remained weak, reflecting cautious spending, of course, but stable land values and manageable loan delinquencies suggest many farmers are still finding ways to weather the downturn. We're also going to be talking about the State of the American Farmer report that Modern Ag Alliance put forward, looking not just at the economic impact, but the mental and emotional impact as well later on in the episode, Tanner.
Well, we've already shared a Corteva tip today, but now we've got news on the Corteva split. Corteva has announced this week that its planned seed and genetics spinoff company will be called Vylor Incorporated, with the separation still expected to be completed in the fourth quarter of 2026. The company says the new brand will continue to build on the legacy that has been built by pioneer Brevant Hogemeyer, and Corteva will be focusing on advanced seed genetics and biotech innovation. Corteva says that Vylor will launch more than 4,000 germ patents, over 2,000 biotechnology patents, and one of the largest seed production networks in the world. Future Vylor CEO Chuck Magro is optimistic, stating that the food security to energy security, powered by groundbreaking technology, elite germplasm, and advanced product portfolio, Vylor will be uniquely positioned to help solve some of the world's toughest challenges. Corteva says that the separation is intended to strengthen innovation and create new opportunities for growers as agriculture continues to evolve. Been seeing a lot on social media about this split, Delaney. Quite interesting. Some of those Corteva brands on the seed side are going to be rolled up into those flagships.
It'll be interesting to see how that progresses forward in the industry. Switching tracks, the EPA has released a draft fungicide strategy this week, which aims at protecting endangered species while maintaining farmers' access to crop protection tools. The proposal is part of the agency's broader Endangered Species Act efforts and outlines how fungicide risks would be assessed, where mitigation practices would be required, and how growers can comply through flexible mitigation measures. That's a mouthful. The EPA officials also say that the strategy is designed to provide regulatory certainty while protecting more than 1,000 threatened and endangered species. Industry groups and university experts say the 163-page proposal, Tanner, are you going to read that one?
Nope.
Generally follows the framework already established for herbicides and insecticides. Richard Gupton with the Agricultural Retailers Association says the requirements appear consistent with previous EPA strategies, while the University of Tennessee Extension plant pathologist Heather Kelly says regional differences in endangered species and fungicide use could lead to varying requirements across the country. The strategy relies on the Pesticide Use Limitation Areas, or PULAs, along with mitigation point system that will require growers and retailers to use labels and digital decision tools more closely. EPA's public comment period remains open now through June 29th, with the agency expected to finalize that strategy later this year.
I think I'm going to take that report and throw it into ChatGPT and ask it for
that actually is a great use of that.
Cliff notes. Well, next week could be a big market-moving week. We will see what happens and what we are to expect when the U.S. and China prepare for trade talks later this month. Grain markets are watching very closely for signs of additional Chinese purchases of U.S. ag products. Market analyst Jerry Golke told Brownfield Traders that they appear optimistic that positive news could support soybean exports, especially as current export sales remain behind normal pace. However, Golke cautioned that previous trade agreements, including the Phase 1 deal during the President Trump's first term, ultimately depended upon whether U.S. commodities were competitively priced. Analysts say markets will be looking for more specific purchase commitments, measured in bushels or metric tons rather than broad dollar value targets, as both countries plan to have their meeting mid-May. I believe this is potentially at the end of next week, which ties into lots of news when you talk WASDE report. Plenty of progress, and we'll get more into that at the end of the episode.
And then we'll have a holiday trading week following that, so a lot to watch here in the markets. The National Corn Growers Association is expanding its National Corn Yield Contest with a new pilot category this year designed for a short-season corn. Beginning with the 2026 contest, farmers will be able to enter hybrids with a relative maturity of 99 days or fewer, giving producers in shorter growing regions the opportunity to compete on a national level as well. The pilot category is open to growers in any state, but will be limited to the first 100 entries. NCGA First Vice President Matt Frostick says short-term season growers work to maximize every day of the growing season, and the new category recognizes that effort. Supporters of the expansion say the contest helps encourage innovation, stronger management practices, and higher yields, while highlighting productivity gains across the U.S. corn industry. And honestly, Tanner, I think this category is going to be the most impressive, thinking about the short window you have trying to push yield as much as possible. I'm going to think this is one to be watching. Before we get into some livestock news, though, we'll be right back after this short break.
When it comes to your corn, you know a strong start means a strong finish. That's why you're up before dawn, finishing paperwork, repairing equipment, filling the tank, and prepping the sprayer. All to give your corn the head start it needs. With Resicor Rev corn herbicide from Corteva Agriscience, you'll beat weeds off the starting line. See how full throttle weed control with Resicor Rev will accelerate your start to the season at corteva.us/Resicor Rev.
Well, the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship and the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services have confirmed cases of pseudorabies virus, or PRV, in a small commercial swine facility that is located in the state of Iowa. We have not heard of pseudorabies in almost 20 years. I was just telling you it was a blast of the past from my childhood, still commonly vaccinated against, but this was located as the first known case in a commercial swine facility since 2004. State officials are saying 5 boars tested positive after being shipped from an outdoor facility in Texas, where additional infected pigs were also identified. Officials say there is no evidence that the virus spread beyond the affected animals or that facility. State veterinarian Jeff Kyson said that pseudorabies is a contagious viral disease that primarily affects pigs. Though humans are considered resistant to the virus, Iowa Secretary of Ag Mike Nag said the detection poses no risk to food safety or consumers, but there could be short-term impacts on some of their export markets.
Yeah, speaking of that, did you hear about the cruise ship that went on a bird watching tour and now they are being quarantined? Completely different.
Hantavirus.
Yeah, completely different, but it made me think of that as well as we think about maybe animal diseases or viruses impacting humans as well. President Donald Trump's administration is investigating the nation's 4 largest meatpackers this week for potential antitrust violations. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche says the meatpacking sector could lead to a major settlement involving the other major protein markets, including chicken, pork, and turkey. Secretary Rollins says tight cattle supplies continue to play a major role in higher beef prices and broader food security concerns. She says the administration is working to increase processing capacity by supporting mid-sized and smaller processors while also encouraging producers to keep their heifers. The 4 largest beef processors currently control more than 85% of the U.S. beef processing sector, highlighting the level of consolidation that we've seen in the industry. And as federal officials continue examining competition and pricing practices across the protein market. It was interesting, though. I was having coffee with Bill Rubis, a well-known folk in the beef industry, and he was saying, Tanner, that even though we've seen this consolidation, take a look at the pounds we're still producing because we really haven't seen a huge shift in the amount of beef we're producing, even with the smaller herds. So something we'll have to dig a bit deeper into.
Yeah, larger cattle's certainly playing into that. But the battle lines are beginning to form between the Senate as lawmakers prepare for a possible action on after the House passed the Farm Bill earlier this month. Senate Ag Committee Chairman John Boozman says that he's calling the House measure a good bill and says updating the farm program credit limits will be a key priority, arguing current policies are based on outdated economic conditions, while supporters say it marks the most significant farm bill progress since 2018, amid those growing pressures from farmers and other ag groups for stronger financial support. At the same time, Senate Democrats, led by Amy Klobuchar, are pushing for changes, saying that the bill must better address the rising farm bankruptcies, higher input costs, and rural economic stress, while also raising concerns about proposed SNAP adjustment that could shift more administrative costs to states. On the House side, Representative Dunn and Representative Bacon said that they were opposed to blocking E-15 sale legislation, arguing, though, that some lawmakers misunderstood the policy mandating its use rather than simply removing seasonal restrictions. Biofuel advocates are urging Speaker Mike Johnson to bring a standalone E-15 bill to the floor, with Representative Johnson indicating possibly there would be a vote as soon as May 13th if that were to happen.
Well, Tanner, I know this is something that the Farm for Profit podcast is very passionate about. I just saw your episode on it earlier this week, but Mental Health Month, as we wrap up today's news, May is recognized as Mental Health Awareness Month, and farm organizations are urging farmers and ranchers to prioritize mental health and stress as we continue to see that rise in rural America. The National Farmers Union says more than 2/3 of rural residents lack adequate access to mental health care due to distance, staffing shortages, and stigma surrounding treatment. Groups including the American Farm Bureau Federation, farm credit organizations, and others are working to expand counseling resources, improve access to care, and strengthen rural support networks as producers continue to face financial pressures, weather uncertainty, growing operational stresses, and so many others.
Yeah, whenever we do those episodes, the total listens are lower than average, but the engagement is nearly 4 times the level.
Certainly an important topic.
It is. There's been a lot of ag policy news lately, as we just reported on, particularly, though, around pesticides at both the federal and state levels. So to help break down what's been happening and what this could mean for our farmer listeners, we've been joined by Elizabeth Burns-Thompson, the Executive Director of the Modern Ag Alliance. Let's get into that conversation right now.
Well, talking ag policy today with Elizabeth Burns-Thompson, the Executive Director of Modern Ag Alliance. And Elizabeth, I know this is a passion area of yours. I enjoy watching the policy and discussing it with folks like you. So thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It's always good to be back.
So I know we had you on previously. It's been a few months now to talk about some of the major policy updates that are going on in DC and around the country. Before we get into some of the nitty-gritty of those issues that we're watching here on the podcast, tell us a little bit more about how Modern Ag is keeping an eye on all the various issues and how you're kind of prioritizing those that are most impactful to the farmers and folks that you work with.
Sure. And for those that maybe aren't familiar with Modern Ag Alliance, we are a coalition of ag stakeholders. So my members are made up of many of the state trade associations, commodity groups, farm bureaus, farmers unions, really from all across the country, from coast to coast, really representing everything from, traditional corn and soybeans, row crops like you and I are used to here in Middle America, to produce, strawberries, sugar beets, potatoes, and all. I give that large background because we're kind of like the new food pyramid, right? Very diverse groups on top, but very laser focused in terms of the issues that we are focused on trying to solve for. And that is ensuring that farmers of all walks of life, right, have access to critical tools that they need to be successful. And when we're talking about that, we're really focused specifically on pesticides. So a bulk of our initiative over the last year and a half that I've been part of the Alliance has been ensuring consistency in pesticide labeling, specifically consistency in the safety component pieces of those labels from state to state.
And obviously we had some big movement with pesticide labeling here over the last few weeks in combination with the Farm Bill. Give us the behind the curtain view of some of the pieces that you were watching as this started to unfold.
Yes. So pesticides are certainly don't lack a level of controversy. There's a reason that we call them crop protection tools as opposed to pesticides today. But yes, it's not only a key topic of conversation in many of the state houses that we've been working in, but also that conversation has obviously made its way to Washington, D.C. We have been talking about, the urgency and need for federal uniformity on pesticide labeling. In fact, this has been something that multiple Congresses have talked about. The initial marker legislation was actually introduced in the last Congress in a bipartisan fashion. So we were very pleased to see that language be adapted and then incorporated into the House Farm Bill this go round. We had some really good conversation with folks. What unfortunately we saw transpire is a wealth of misinformation around, pesticides, what governs them and their use, really take down, unfortunately, very good policy. So I think what that has showcased, at least to my folks, as well as I hope to agriculture writ large, is that it is more important now than ever that we are telling our story about what tools we use, how we use them safely, and why they are so incredibly important, not just to the successful operation of America's farms, but what that means then for consumers in the supply chain.
Is it unique that we saw the Pesticide Labeling Act tried to get pushed through with the Farm Bill?
Really, not really. If you think about, we have very rarely do we have a standalone piece of policy, right? A farm bill is known to have a lot of different component pieces of it. In fact, for those that are interested in all of the different titles of the farm bill, it's everything from crop insurance to food assistance to pesticide policy, like here, to a wide variety of things that are governed and are important to production agriculture. And so it is a really diverse kind of, I think of it almost like a train, right? That has a lot of individual cars on it. We just happen to be one of those cars on that train. And we talk about making sure, policy can get across the finish line of being like the train that can leave the station. And so we were pleased to see that, pesticide in this particular provision was part of that package. Initially, we do hope that conversations can continue, that there can continue to be some robust conversations on whatever the Farm Bill train looks like on the Senate side. We haven't seen language on that respect just yet, but we do know that this topic will continue to be something that not just agriculture needs to talk about, but we know it's something that the consumers and voters are interested in talking about. And so we are really trying to ramp up that conversation. Again, back to those tenets of what we use, why we use them, and how we use them safely.
So where do you think that the Pesticide Labeling Act goes from here? Is it dead in the water?
I'm both an optimist and a realist. So I do think it has a really tough road ahead in Washington, D.C. We knew that from day one. I think that's why agriculture has looked at this problem as a all of the above type solution. So we have been working both on the state front, so with a number of state legislatures, both last year and this year. Proud to stand here today saying that we have 3 states across the country that have put forth uniformity policy and passed that into law. That was North Dakota, Georgia, and most recently Kentucky this year. So those are critically important as part of that momentum. We do hope at some point in time, the federal perspective, we can get language across the finish line federally. But then you also have conversations happening from a judicial perspective. So in addition to all the conversations around the Farm Bill last week, there was also a very landmark case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court that had oral arguments on Monday of last week. And that really is the start of what could potentially also be solutions that come through the judicial branch, depending upon how the interpretations, come out of the court, which we don't know when we'll see an answer to that particular case. It could be as early as the end of June. But I'm not a betting person, but we'll see. But that could potentially also shine some clarity on this potential problem or on this issue. But again, it is really such a robust issue. It is not limited to one chemistry or one company. These are really problems that every aspect of the industry is facing. And so we are looking for solutions that can be industry wide as well. And so that's what this legislation at the end of the day is looking to provide is finally, once and for all, uniformity on these labels so that we have the surety from the business perspective that these products can continue to be available, but also that consumers can have peace of mind at the end of the day that there's uniformity and safety as well.
Now, another piece of legislation that I don't think a lot of folks are familiar with is the Luna Amendment. Talk us through what that is and its connection to the Farm Bill.
Sure. So the Luna Amendment, which was presented by Representative Luna out of Florida, what effectively that did was to strip out the key pesticide provision, the labeling uniformity provision that was part of the Farm Bill. So Section 10205, not a number that anyone needs to commit to memory, but that was a really critical provision. That was what would have codified the Ag Labeling Uniformity Act, ALUA, just for another acronym for folks to add to the repertoire. But unfortunately, Luna's amendment went forward to strip that language out. There was a recorded vote on that amendment that unfortunately did pass and unfortunately stripped our language out.
I want to switch tracks a little bit because the Modern Ag Alliance released a State of the American Farmer report earlier this year. And this was the first ever report you've done of this kind. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about what drove the Modern Ag Alliance to develop this report. There's, as you mentioned, some of your stakeholders do great reports already. What drove Modern Ag to create their own?
Sure. So we really wanted to take a perspective of matching both the quantitative data that we are getting out of, political polls and economic analysis, and matching it with the qualitative of what are the feelings of rural America? What is the tone and tenor of the public of farmers and ranchers across this country, and mend those two things together into an analysis to give not only our elected officials, but really the general public a snapshot of what is happening across rural America. And again, I highlight that, what we see of a lot of press releases out is a standalone poll or a standalone data-based analysis, or on the other side, a standalone piece of those qualitative pieces. But what we really tried to do is to bridge those together to create that accurate snapshot of not only, the data points that showcase the pain that is being felt across rural America, but emotionally, what does that mean? What are farmers taking home with them each and every night to the dinner table, and what are they facing, not just from an economic perspective, but more of a big picture perspective. I think one of the biggest take homes that we found out of that is there's not only financial distress, but emotional distress amongst the rural public. Not only the financial means of being able to pass their operations down to the next generation, but whether or not they even want to do that right now, which I think is, from somebody that comes from, a family farm and an operation that was, my family started our farm from scratch. And so to think that we sit in a position now where there are those involved in agriculture that think that is not a profession that they would recommend to the next generation, to me is just as jarring of a statistic as any type of economic data point that we can put forward. And that should be something that lawmakers are taking to heart.
Yeah, and to follow up on that too, the report indicated that about 60% of farmers who responded fear that farming may cease to exist as we know it. And that's certainly not a feel-good sentiment, but is the reality of where we're at today. What kind of insight did you get around that from the farmers that you surveyed and talked to?
I think, Delaney, you bring up a very good point about, just your profession ceasing to exist. Now, do we think agriculture is going to go away writ large? Obviously not the case. We all need to eat and drive and all of those things. But to losing control or the ability to have an impact on your industry is I think what is at the core of it. And we saw some of that unfortunately take place most recently in this last week around Farm Bill debate, right? You have a lot of folks that have very little to no background in production agriculture having a disparate impact on what the future of that policy does or doesn't look like. And farmers' voices just truly are not feeling heard. And it is so hard to cut through the noise, especially if we get to a point where we are legislating based on tweets and likes and social impressions, that becomes a very slippery slope for those folks that spend, their morning, noon, and night in a tractor cab or tending to animals. And so we've got to be able to find a way for farmers to be heard, to feel heard, and to make that impact, because right now we're finding that they just don't feel that way.
I would say that's certainly a similar sentiment that I hear from a lot of folks as I'm getting out and traveling around the U.S. is, what can we do? I don't feel my voice is heard. I don't know that anyone has, the answer, the key that unlocks that yet, but what's Modern Ag Alliance's approach there? You mentioned at the beginning of the episode to tell your story. I certainly think that helps, but what can we do in this time where we're economically feeling the pressure, we're emotionally or mentally feeling the pressure? Give us maybe, I know you're a realist, but maybe some positivity here too from your seat.
I don't know that I have the golden key here solution, but I do think that the politics is still very much based on relationships. And if there's something that rural America does very well, is that we are very relationship based. Agriculture has always been something that has been based on relationships. Think about small communities. So at the end of the day, while I do hope that we are not getting to a point where we legislate based on who is the loudest in the room, again, looking at agriculture being less than 2% of the population, that creates a really tough dynamic for us just now and going forward. But we do relationships very well, and we need to continue to do relationships very well. So taking the time, not everybody's going to become a TikTok aficionado or viral or whatever the term is of the day. But we can all get to know who our elected official is, and we can maintain that level of respect and relationship with those individuals. So when it comes down to tough issues or to topics that maybe don't fit into a mainstream narrative, they can understand and trust that they can go back to their trusted farmers. And at the end of the day, that those relationships will reign supreme. And we have seen that take place in some of these conversations, more so at the state level. I am hopeful that that can continue to bolster and grow. But again, that takes the investment of time and energy to keep those relationships alive.
Well, we've certainly covered a myriad of issues in the last 15 minutes. Is there any other issues we haven't touched on that you'd like to mention for our listeners?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say, there's always an opportunity to do a little bit more, to talk about a little bit more. I don't think that we should be hesitant to say that we work in agriculture, that we use pesticides, and that those are things that can be used safely. And if you want some more information or some talking points or some fun little fun facts to incorporate into your conversations, we have a wealth of those on our website, and more information at modernagalliance.org.
And Elizabeth, is that the best place for folks to go if they'd like to read the State of the American Farm Report for themselves?
Yes, we've got the State of American Farmer Report. We've got backgrounds on analysis on a wealth of things that have happened throughout this last year, and resources for folks to scroll through, as well as links to our social media. We may not have gone viral, but we are certainly on all those platforms, looking for ways to be able to do outreach and bridge those communication gaps.
Fantastic. Well, always a pleasure catching up with you, Elizabeth. Thanks for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, always good. Thanks, Delaney.
Well, sorry I missed that one with EBT, but a pleasure to have her on as always. Looking at some fertilizer news, despite all-time high import values, the U.S. brought in a record amount, 1.4 million short tons of urea in March, pushing first quarter 2026 imports to 2.7 million tons. Much of that was shipped before disruptions tied to the U.S.-Iranian conflict. Limited supply and flows through key shipping routes. Markets remain volatile as geopolitical uncertainty, including potential changes in the Strait of Hormuz vessel traffic, that has added energy risk premiums and contributed to weaker U.S. dollar, while global fertilizer markets sit in a stalemate between strong seller pricing and hesitant buyers waiting for lower prices. A recent media update from Josh Linville of StoneX shows that nitrogen supplies in North America remain generally adequate. The global constraints persist, raising some questions about the timing and logistics, even if overall availability appears sufficient on paper heading into the spring and early summer demand. We hinted at it, Delaney. Next week's going to be a busy week. What are we seeing in the commodity markets?
Yes, certainly. And this week's trade was volatile to add to that chaos, with elevated positioning as markets prepare for next Tuesday's May WASDE, as you mentioned. One of the most closely watched updates that we will see all year is the May WASDE report, which offers an early look at the new crop balance sheets. Weather also remains a major global driver, with reports from Mato Grosso, Brazil, suggesting soybean production could fall about 5% due to higher input costs and developing El Nino conditions, making it a drier condition for them down there. In the livestock markets, cattle futures saw long liquidation after running into some resistance near recent contract highs, and hog futures found some support following recent pressure. We should start to see a summer rally for at least the hog market here. Who knows with cattle if we'll see that thing turn back around to the upside again. But again, interesting conversation with Bill Rubis this week. We're going to have him on the podcast soon, Tanner, to talk about all things cattle.
Yeah, what a great episode. It's glad to be back. Are you a fan of cruising, Delaney?
Of cruising?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. Like cruising
going on a
around?
Cruise ship. Taking
absolutely
a vacation.
Not. And
no?
Seeing the headlines of people being quarantined on a cruise ship sounds like my worst nightmare.
I can't imagine going on a cruise to bird watch. If I was on that cruise, I'd probably be watching the bird watchers watch birds, because I'm sure that would be more entertaining.
Certainly wouldn't be high on my list. But if you are on a cruise and you're catching up with Ag News Daily, we certainly appreciate you squeezing us into your time. Or if you're in the planter or the cultivator this spring, keep up with all the latest headlines with us on Ag News Daily. You can also find us on all the major social media platforms. But Tanner, for today, what do you say we let the people go?
Let's let them go.